On today's show, Alex Ovechkin is coming back for year 22, and the Capitals aren't just bringing back their captain. They're betting that at 41 years old, Ovi still has another historic season left.
Hey, this is Ryan Leonard from the Washington Capitals. Tune in to my favorite podcast, Lock On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello, and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dan HOLMI, and today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Join all the action at FanDuel.com to play Daily Dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer this MLB season. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about Alex Ovechkin and no farewell tour yet. Ovechkin still isn't calling this his final season. He's 40 years old. He's about to be 41 years old. The roster around him is getting younger. So where does Ovi actually fit? And could this really be the beginning of the end? A bit later, another Gretzky chase. That Ovi already owns the NHL's regular season goal record. Now, there's another Gretzky number sitting there, 10 goals away. But where we will start is the Ovi contract. One of the fascinating stories for me of the summer. Why did Washington structure this deal with such a massive games played bonus? And what does the contract tell us about when the Capitals actually decided they wanted Ovechkin back? Because when we talk about the Ovechkin contract, the big takeaway is this: the Capitals didn't sign Ovechkin and then build around him. They built the roster that they wanted. They created the financial structure for him to return, and then Ovi made the decision. And that is what's being said, is that Chris Patrick assembled a roster that was built for Alex Ovechkin, with Alex Ovechkin or without Alex Ovechkin. And at the time, I thought to myself, that sounded impossible. How do you do that? Well, as it turns out, Chris Patrick did just that. But talking about the Capitals didn't sign Ovechkin and then build around him, that is the biggest thing I want to take away from this contract, is that they built the team that they wanted. Because you look at the surface, right? 1 year, what is it, $4.25 million average annual value, a 40-year-old player about to be 41. Looks pretty straightforward, but it is not. The deal is structured, and the structure, I think, tells us a lot. That the Ovechkin contract comes with a $1 million base salary, $3.25 million signing bonus, a $4.75 million games played bonus after 10 games, and a $4.25 million cap hit. But if Ovechkin plays those 10 games, his total compensation jumps to $9 million. So he is not going to be hurting in the money department that Alex Ovechkin is still handsomely paid. It is just Chris Patrick and the Capitals organization getting creative when it comes to being incentive-laden. So we talk about the 10 games, and that's an important number because Ovechkin played all 82 games this last season. Quite something. The season before, 65. The season before, 79. He generally plays darn near a full season unless there is an injury or concern. And Alex Ovechkin has been known to be dinged up. We think back to the Jack McBain injury against Utah and that he missed some time there. But big picture last season, we just want to talk about the most recent here, 25-26. Played all 82 games. So unless something goes horribly wrong, we're not realistically talking about a player who is going to miss the bonus. We're talking about $9 million season with a $4.25 million cap hit. And that is a massive difference. And that's why the structure matters. The Capitals get the cap number that they can actually work with. Ovechkin gets paid like the franchise icon that he is. Both sides win. You got Tuch, you got Kyrou, you got Jenner, you got Desharnais. You got all these important pieces of the future. And the cherry on top, Alex Ovechkin comes back for at least one more season. And the cap number mattered, right? Because this is where Chris Patrick deserves a lot of credit, because Washington didn't just stumble into this. The Capitals had roughly $4.4 million in projected cap space remaining, and Ovechkin's cap hit is 4.25. Now, that is not some random coincidence. That is roster construction. And the front office knew there was a possibility that Ovechkin would return. I think they kind of knew more than not that he probably would. And instead of waiting until the last second and hoping the math worked, the Capitals positioned themselves to make the deal happen. And the smart roster management, because Ovechkin had been very clear throughout the offseason. He wanted to see what the Capitals were building. He wasn't simply saying, I'm Alex Ovechkin, give me another contract. He wanted to know whether this team could actually compete, and that is what happened. And, I've been hard on Chris Patrick that he didn't do enough last summer, not this summer, but the summer before. But, when you look at it, big picture, there was a lot of extenuating circumstances, if you will, that there wasn't as much cap space at that time, and there weren't the players available, that the Capitals had more money to spend this summer than they did the season before, and they got creative. And, I like Alex Ovechkin, because I think in a lot of ways, Alex Ovechkin was saying, you knew that it was going to be my last year, at least contractually last year, and you didn't do anything to speak of except for sort of and Chisholm. And then guess what? We didn't live up to expectations. If I come back, I want to come back to a team that is going to compete. And you've heard similar things, Dylan Larkin, Austin Matthews, etc. If I'm going to stay with this team long term, put together a winning team. And what did Washington do? They answered in a big way. Jordan Kyrou, Alex Tuch, Boone Jenner, Vincent Desharnais. Those aren't moves you make if you're quietly preparing for a rebuild. Those are moves to design to make the roster better. And I think more importantly, those moves are designed to make the roster more competitive now, not in the future. And Alex Ovechkin noticed. And the timing tells us everything, right? Because this is where I think the story gets really interesting, because Ovechkin's return wasn't just about money. I think he has all the money that he could possibly need. I think he wants to get paid a market rate. I think that he did. But it wasn't just even about chasing records. It wasn't about even hockey. It was about whether he believed the Capitals could give him another meaningful season. Not any team. He didn't want to play hockey for hockey's sake. He didn't want to play on another NHL team. He didn't want to go to Dynamo, at least right now. He wanted to believe the Capitals could give him another meaningful season. He said the Capitals' announcement that he had the opportunity to take time with his family, that he was healthy, and that he wanted to compete for a playoff spot. And notice something, he didn't lead with Gretzky. I think that's us as fans kind of projecting what we want from Ovechkin, or what we think that he wants to chase down Gretzky. I think it's in there. The CPU is running his brain, but I don't think that's what's driving the engine. He didn't say, I'm coming back to break another record. He didn't make the announcement about history. He made it about competing with the Capitals. And that's important because Ovechkin has already accomplished the thing everybody spent years telling us he couldn't accomplish. He caught and passed Gretzky. He owns the NHL regular season goal record. Now he's coming back because there's something he still wants. Another playoff run, another chance, another season, and maybe another championship. And yes, another record is sitting there. But I don't think the record is driving the decision. I think the opportunity to compete for DC is. He's faithful to the Capitals. He could have played anywhere. And what the contract really says, and here's my opinion, this is probably the most mutually beneficial Ovechkin contract the Capitals could have constructed. The Capitals get flexibility, Ovechkin gets security, and both sides get a chance to keep this relationship going without pretending we know what happens after this season, right? That's the beauty of a one-year contract. There's no artificial commitment beyond 26-27. If Ovechkin wants to keep playing, then we can talk. If he decides it's time, nobody is trapped. And if the Capitals make the playoffs, well, then this whole thing gets really interesting, right? Because suddenly we're not talking about an aging superstar hanging around for one final season. We're talking about Alex Ovechkin potentially leading a younger Capitals team into the postseason. That is a completely different story. So to wrap up segment one, my biggest takeaway is this: the Capitals' plan for Ovechkin's return, the contract structure proves it. The roster moves prove it, and Alex Ovechkin's comments about wanting to compete explain why he ultimately said yes. The Capitals didn't just leave the door open for Ovi, they built a roster that made walking through that door attractive. And now he's back, but that's only half the story, because there is another number sitting out there that Ovechkin could reach a whole lot faster than people realize. 10 goals. And that's where we're headed, straight ahead. Keep it right here. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with Daily Dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with everyday's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep. Now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. And if we want to keep it local, the Nats take on the Rangers. And one of my favorites for a daily dinger is the young star in Abimelec Ortiz. This kid is impressing in a big way for the Nats, so that's my favorite for a daily dinger. What is yours? Let's go to FanDuel. So you're ready to play your game? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So the biggest takeaway here in segment 2 is Alex Ovechkin is only 10 goals away from another Wayne Gretzky record. And based on what he did at age 40, there's a very real chance he breaks it before the calendar even turns to 2027. And, you know, that's one of the things that we know about Ovi. He continues to keep moving and chasing down Gretzky. That's not hype. That's math. Because let's talk about the number here. Ovechkin finished last season with 1,006 combined regular season and playoff goals. Wayne Gretzky, the great one, 1,016. So, according to my simple math and yours as well, that's 10 goals. That's it, 10. So now, obviously, those aren't 10 regular season goals. We're talking about the combined goals record. But still, when you're talking about Alex Ovechkin, 10 goals is not an Everest, shall we say. Because when we talk about the pace, last season, Ovechkin scored 32 goals in 82 games. That is approximately 0.39 goals per game. To score 10 goals over 82 games, he would need only to average 0.12 goals per game. So do the math. That is an enormous difference. At last year's scoring rate, 10 goals would have taken roughly 26 games. 26. And that's assuming he maintains at the same rate. We don't know, right? There's injuries, there's the team play, all of those things. So if Ovechkin stays healthy, if he gets the power play opportunities, if the Capitals can keep feeding him chances, there is a legitimate possibility we're talking about the combined goals record around the holidays. What a nice present for all of us Capitals fans, maybe even earlier. We don't know, and that's what makes this so ridiculous that we're sitting here talking about a 41-year-old Ovechkin in September potentially breaking another Wayne Gretzky record in the first half of the season. That's not normal, but that is Ovechkin. And there's more here. The combined goals record isn't the only milestone sitting there. Ovechkin finished last season with 64 points. Another season around that level puts him within striking distance of Mario Lemieux on the all-time scoring list. Can we believe it that these records just keep getting knocked down season after season after season. It is quite something to think about. And I definitely think that if Alex Ovechkin sets his mind to it, it is possible. And that's where this thing starts being bigger than one record, because Ovechkin isn't climbing one list. He's continuing to move through the entire NHL record book. Goals, points, games, playoff production, power play goals. The milestones just keep stacking up, and somehow we're still having this conversation about what he might accomplish next. And that's the part I think that gets lost. We've become so accustomed to Ovi doing historic things that it almost feels normal. And that's one of the pinch me things, right? I don't think will fully be appreciated until he retires. But right now, he's 40 currently, and this is where I have to stop and say it. He's 40 years old. You think about that. Most players are nowhere near this level at 40. Most players don't score 32 goals at 40. Most players at 40 don't play all 82 games. And most 40-year-old players are not leading their team in scoring and goals. That very well could change this next season, but we're talking about last season, and most certainly, most aren't coming back for year 22 while chasing another Wayne Gretzky record. But Ovechkin did all of that, and now he's doing that again. And that's why I don't think we should treat the 10-goal gap as some impossible mountain. Could something happen? Absolutely. He's 41, right? Injuries happen. Age happens. Father Time eventually collects every bill. But based purely on the evidence that we have, 10 goals looks very attainable. But the record chase has changed. Now we're watching the sequel, and this time there isn't nearly as much drama. 10 goals, that's the number. And if he reaches it, we're going to have another moment where Ovechkin and Gretzky are connected forever. Except this time, Ovechkin won't be the guy who broke Gretzky's regular season record. He'll also have passed Gretzky's combined regular season and playoff goal total. So there is a lot of milestones. That's another piece of history, another reason to watch, another reason this season matters. Because here's the catch. There's one thing I don't want to do. I don't want to turn this season into a glorified Ovechkin farewell tour. He has not said it's a farewell tour. He has not said this is his last season. And if you listen closely to what he's saying, he's not even sure, right? And that's where this thing gets really interesting, because the records are measurable. The contract, the goals are measurable. But the question of whether this is the end, nobody knows. Not even Ovechkin, and that's exactly where we're going next. Ovechkin is 10 goals away from Wayne Gretzky's combined goal record. At last year's pace, that's not a distant target. It's an early season target, and if he stays healthy, we're probably going to spend a good chunk of the first half of the season watching him chase another piece of hockey history. But the biggest question isn't whether he can break the record, it's what happens after he does. Because Ovi still hasn't told us whether he's coming back for year 23, and that uncertainty, that's the most fascinating part of this entire story. That's where we're headed, straight ahead. Keep it right here. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So moving into the final segment of Locked On Capitals, talking about no farewell yet. Because the biggest takeaway is this: Alex Ovechkin is not treating 2026-27 like a farewell tour because he genuinely doesn't know whether it is one. And honestly, I believe him. This doesn't sound like a player playing games with the media. It sounds like a player who hasn't made the decision yet. In an interview with RII Novosti, Ovechkin was asked whether this would be his final season, and his answer was essentially anything is possible. It is too early to say. He'll know more once he's back in Washington with his family. That's not exactly a retirement announcement, and I don't think that is where we're at right now. And then he was asked about the idea of a farewell tour. Same answer. He wasn't ready to commit to anything. And why would he be at this point? Because we have seen this movie before. Last season. Ovechkin has actually been on the other side of this. He's been the guy encouraging teammates to come back onto the ice to acknowledge a legend. He did it for Andre Fleury. He did it for Anze Kopitar. So it's not like Ovechkin doesn't understand what a farewell moment looks like. He understands it perfectly. He just doesn't seem ready to have one for himself yet. And I think that's telling because Ovechkin already knew this was, if Alex Ovechkin knew this was absolutely the end, why not say it? Why not embrace the farewell? Why not make this entire season a celebration? He hasn't. Instead, he's leaving the door open. And I think that's because he wants to see what happens. And a lot of it has to do with the roster, right? And this takes us right back to the beginning of the episode. Remember why Ovechkin waited. He wanted to see what the Capitals were going to build. Now look around him. Kyrou, Tuch, Jenner, Desharnais, and a collection of younger players who are going to have increasingly important roles. This is not the same Capitals team Ovechkin was dragging across the finish line a few years ago. The roster is changing. The team is getting younger, and Ovechkin is becoming the extreme outlier. He's turning 41 in September. The next oldest Capitals are Justin Hall and Dylan McIlrath. That's a 7-year gap. 7 years between Ovechkin and Dylan McIlrath. Ovechkin isn't just the veteran anymore. He's from a different generation. He's literally playing with guys who grew up watching him. That is pretty wild. And players that looked up to him. See Justin sort of, for example. But that could actually help him, right? And here's where I think Washington's offseason gets really interesting. That Ovechkin doesn't need to carry the entire offensive load anymore, and well, he shouldn't. That's the whole point of adding players like Kyrou and Tuch. Give Ovechkin more offensive support. Give him better offensive zone opportunities. Keep his minutes manageable. Get him on the power play and adjust accordingly on how he performs. There's going to be a lot of players vying for those minutes, and let him do the thing that he's still ridiculously good at: score goals. That is it. You don't need Ovechkin winning defensive races in the corner for 20 minutes a night, right? You don't need him playing like he's 27. You need him to be put in situations where his elite skills still matter. And that's why the potential combination of Dylan Strome and, let's say, Jordan Kyrou is so intriguing. You have Strome providing the center presence, Kyrou bringing the speed and transition offense, and Ovechkin gets to post up in his office if he wants. You know his office. Left circle, power play, one-timer goal. We've seen it for many years here. And the younger Caps need him as well. And this isn't just about what Ovechkin needs. The younger Capitals need Ovechkin. They need to see what preparation looks like. They need to see what longevity looks like. They need to see what happens when you don't stop working after you have accomplished everything. Because Ovechkin could have retired after breaking Gretzky's record. And I don't think any of us would have blamed him. Instead, he's coming back. And he's putting himself through another NHL season, another training camp, another 84-game grind, another opportunity to win. And that matters, especially on a roster transitioning from one generation to the next. Ovechkin isn't just trying to score more goals. He's becoming the bridge between the Capitals' past and their future. So what happens, right, if he breaks the record? This is the question I keep coming back to. Let's say Ovechkin scores goal number 10. He passes Gretzky's combined goals total. The building explodes. Everybody celebrates. And then what? You know, there's some fear out there and questions, I guess paranoia probably, of Ovechkin saying, I'm done. I don't think that is the case. I think he will honor the contract. That's why I don't think the Gretzky chase answers the retirement question. I think it actually might make the question harder, because if Ovechkin is still scoring at a meaningful rate, if he's healthy, if the Caps are competitive, if the young guys are coming along, if the Caps make the playoffs, why wouldn't he want to come back? And that's where this entire season could take a turn, because the playoff question, right? Because this is ultimately why Ovechkin came back. He wants to compete and win. And the Capitals believe that this roster can get back into the postseason conversation. That's the urgency. We're not chasing nostalgia or celebration or a farewell tour. Competition. If the Capitals are fighting for a playoff spot in March and Ovechkin is still producing, you really think he's going to look around and say, well, I guess it's time. I don't necessarily think that's the case. Anything is possible. And, you know, if the Capitals make it to the playoffs, I think he might very well consider coming back. Now we're having an extremely different conversation because a playoff run could change everything. It could make retirement easier, or it could make retirement almost impossible. So to wrap it up here, Alex Ovechkin is entering his 22nd NHL season. He's 40, about to turn 41. He's 10 goals away from another Gretzky record. He's coming off a 32-goal season. And he's walking into a Capitals roster that's younger, faster, and more aggressively built around the idea of competing. And he still hasn't said this is the end. And I think that is important. Don't call this a farewell tour. Don't assume it's his last ride. And don't put the retirement speech in the script yet, because Ovi hasn't done that yet. All right, I want to thank you once again for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You, my friends, are what makes this show successful. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, as there is no off-season, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. My name is Dan HOLMI, and I'll talk to you again next time.